Did you know this family shot at the US government in a case involving all these departments, with them being acquitted of all charges and paid $3.1 million? Randall Weaver, aka Randy, or as he preferred, Pete, was a self-proclaimed white separatist and ex-Green Beret, which isn't true. Well, the white separatist part is, but he definitely wasn't special forces. Anyway, he had his family consisting of his wife Vicky and his 4 homeschooled children, all of whom were deeply religious, following the Christian faith, with Vicky being the religious head of the family, who in 1978 started seeing prophetic visions, also known as dreams, which displayed her living on a mountain and foretold of an incoming apocalypse. So yeah, when the fuck is that happening, Vicky? Anyway, in 1983, the family decided to visit the Amish to learn how to live without power, and then purchase 8 hectares of land on Ruby Ridge and Boundary County, Idaho. A year later, Randy Weaver and his neighbor Terry had a legal dispute which Randy ended up winning. Of course, in retaliation, as any average Idahoan would, Terry wrote letters to the Secret Service, FBI, and the county sheriff, in which he claimed Randy had threatened to game in the Pope, Ronald Reagan, and the Idaho governor. This led to investigations in the following year, 1985. Fuck knows how they found it out, but the Weavers found out about Terry's scheming. Who am I kidding? Terry seems like the type of guy to just shout out over the fence that he did as much. Or maybe Vicky truly is a prophet for an angry God. I would wager that it was probably the visit they got on February 12th from 2 Secret Service agents, 2 FBI members, and the Boundary County Sheriff alongside his chief investigator. Aren't you supposed to be low-key when you're investigating? Regardless, on February 28th, the Weavers filed an affidavit with the county alleging that their personal enemies were plotting to provoke the FBI into attacking them. Despite this fact, the government later took the letter written by Terry as an overt act against the federal government that the Weavers took. Anyway, the ATF ended up getting involved in the next year when Randy sold some shotguns to an undercover agent and invited them to discuss the formation of a group of schizo white separatists who wanted to fight the government. The only issue though is that the shotgun barrels were sawn off, which is illegal, so the ATF threatened to push the charges on Randy if he didn't snitch on any of his World War II Germany-loving compatriots. Randy refused, and so they tried to push the charges. However, the real issue arises at this point. Randy misses February 20th, 1991 court date. Now this could be down to the fact that the letter sent to him informing him of his court date had the wrong fucking date on it. But regardless, a bench warrant was passed on Randy, although they didn't enact it for over a year because you remember how he was claiming he was a Green Beret? Well, they thought the place was booby-trapped to high hell. As I established at the beginning, that was definitely not the case. On top of this, reports of the Weaver family had shot at the helicopter of Geraldo Rivera on April 18th were released. However, all evidence indicates that that was not the case, including the pilot's testimony and the fact that there's no damage on the helicopter. Despite this, much like Terry's schizo letter, the US government later cited this as fact, claiming that it was evidence of the Weavers' plot against the US government. As of August 21st, 1992, the US government finally decided they should do something about it. So they sent 6 US Marshals equipped with full military camo, night vision goggles, and M16s to begin scouting the ranch. However, they alerted Stryker, Randy Weaver's dog. The US Marshals retreated, but Stryker followed with Samuel, Randy's 14-year-old son, and Kevin Harris, a Weaver family friend, in pursuit, which resulted in the US Marshals game-ending Stryker in front of Samuel. In response, Samuel shouts out, "You've game-ended my dog, you son of a bitch," and starts firing off rounds in their direction. Well, probably not those words exactly, but you get the idea. DUSM William Francis Deegan supposedly then took shots at Samuel, to which Kevin Harris responded with some of his own game-ending Deegan. When Samuel Weaver was trying to retreat, however, DUSM Cooper ended up firing and game-ending him. Any guesses how the government treated one of the US Marshals game-ending a 14-year-old retreating up the hill? Well, they concluded there was no intent for him to game-end or injure Weaver, of course. Both sides recovered the bodies of their fallen. However, the next day, the US had set up FBI SWAT sniper teams looking at the main cabin of the Weavers. When Randy Weaver attempted to open the latch to his shed to visit his fallen son, the FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi fired and injured Randy Weaver through his armpit. Randy, his 16-year-old daughter Sarah, and Kevin Harris proceeded to run back to the main cabin. However, Lon proceeded to fire a second round, which injured Kevin Harris in the chest and proceeded to penetrate the cabin door, game-ending Vicky Weaver, who was holding her 10-month-old baby, Elisheba. It's also worth noting that the FBI decided to employ odd rules of engagement that had a much higher likelihood of someone being game-ended. Now, this is down to the conflict that happened on the 21st, but you could reason Lon Horiuchi wouldn't have taken the second shot, or even the first, if it wasn't for those rules of engagement. Ultimately, everyone chilled the fuck out and they managed to establish negotiations. Oh yeah, and it wasn't even the government that negotiated the surrender, because the Weavers and Harris were under the impression that they would just be game-ended the moment they left the cabin. It was only when the right-wing vice presidential candidate and actual ex-Green Beret, Bo Gritz, came down and negotiated it. Also, by the second day of the standoff, August 22nd, there was already hundreds of people gathered outside of the property. property in protest. A considerable amount of them had radical right views, with the siege being cited as one of the initial incidents that incited events like Charlottesville. Regardless, all of the Weavers and Harris surrendered on August 31st. This led to a long legal dispute in which the Weavers and Harris claimed self-defense, while the US government fumbled about trying to prove that the Weavers had a plot to game in Ronald Reagan or whatever. Ultimately, the Weavers and Harris, who might I add did game in the US Marshal, were acquitted of all charges, with the 3 surviving Weaver daughters receiving $1 million each, and Randy Weaver receiving $100,000. Kevin Harris got a $380,000 settlement in September of 2000. This took much longer because of the fact that federal officials vowed to never give money to anyone who game-ended a US Marshal. Oh, and that Sniper Lum was indicted with manslaughter charges, but they were dropped. How does the US government fuck up so bad they make the schizo white separatist look like a good guy? Luckily, they wrapped this all up in time ago, repeated the game in Waco. Anyway, Randy only actually shockingly game-ended 2 years ago, on May 11th, 2022, at the age of 74. Did you know FPS Russia 1 wasn't Russian, 2 was supplied guns by a man who was later assassinated in a still unsolved case, and 3 got raided and arrested by the ATF? If you're on YouTube in the early 2010s, then it's highly likely that you've encountered FPS Russia, as it was arguably the #1 firearms channel at the time, with YouTube videos receiving tens of millions of views. When I say he wasn't Russian, I really meant it. The most Russian part of his channel was the name and the fake accent he put on. Despite this, many were fooled into believing he was a genuine Russian man. Karl Lamar Myers, who was born in Livonia, Georgia, founded FPS Russia to share his love of firearms. Those firearms had to come from somewhere, however, and that somewhere was a man by the name of Keith Ratliff, who had a specialized federal firearms permit which allowed him to get access to crazy shit that would normally be illegal, such as anti-air batteries and full-auto shotguns, which added to the narrative of Karl being a crazy Russian dude who owned a military's armory. As a result, Keith was brought into the channel behind the scenes as a producer, and they went on to start a business together. This wasn't set to last, however, as roughly 3 years after their partnership began, on January 3rd, 2013, Keith Ratliff was found game-ended in his locked office with a round to the back of the head, with no signs of a struggle. Still to this day, there's no conclusive evidence indicating it was any one suspect. However, of course, the internet being the way that it is, there are a couple theories. The leading 3 being 1, Keith's ex-wife, who he supposedly cheated on, 2, the government, who supposedly had issues with the firearms that he was acquiring, and 3, Kyle, probably just because he was the most publicly facing business associate of Keith. If I'm to be honest, I think all of these theories hold absolutely zero weight. However, the most compelling would be the ex-wife theory. However, I doubt an act driven by passion would be as clean as a professional hit job. It's much more likely that he just had some shady business partners that were a bit more from the organized crime side of things. I mean, how the fuck do you acquire an anti-aircraft battery even with the legal permits? Anyway, due to this, Kyle began to move away from the FPS Russia channel, remaining on the Painkiller Already podcast alongside Woody's Gamertag and Taylor Merker. However, despite this, Kyle's troubles weren't quite over, as the ATF raided his house and his father's farm where he filmed a lot of YouTube videos later that year on March 29th. The ATF spokesperson Richard Coase later said that these raids occurred due to the fact that he used explosives in his YouTube videos. However, this wasn't the last of Kyle's ATF troubles, as around 4 years later in August of 2017, the ATF raided Kyle again. However, this time they actually found something. That something would be marijuana and hash oil, which of course they absolutely fucked him for. This came in the form of a 2-year sentence of possession with the intent to distribute, alongside 2 years of probation and a $7,500 fine. Of course, that's not what they actually gave a fuck about, as they seized Kyle's entire firearms collection and destroyed it. Since its release in 2019, Kyle has talked about the topic on the aforementioned Painkiller Already podcast. However, he's stayed well away from the world of firearms.
Maybe a little shrapnel going. Maybe a lot of shrapnel. Well, I really like this rifle, I've got to say.
Did you know the first person to ever go to prison for war crimes in Australia didn't go in for committing them, but for reporting them? On May 14th, 2024, or a bit over 2 weeks ago as of recording, David McBride was sentenced to 5 years, 8 months of jail, with no chance of parole for 2 of those years and 3 months. David McBride, who was born in Sydney, Australia, originally started his military career in the British Army, serving in Germany before he trained in the Royal Military Academy, but unfortunately failed the entry requirements for the Special Air Services. This led him to fill his years doing security in Africa and even some appearances was on the British TV show Wanted as a tracker. Around 2003, however, he enlisted in his home country's defense force as an Australian army lawyer, which revolved around him persecuting and acting as defense for individuals who are accused of war crimes overseas, which, when you're dealing with Aussies, is remarkably often. This led him to being deployed in Afghanistan twice, once in 2011 and once in 2013. He was then medically discharged in 2017 for PTSD, however not before he had stolen classified military documents which outlined war crimes Australians had committed over in Afghanistan. He then leaked this to the Australian Broadcasting Company, however their coverage of it, he later said, was dissatisfying. There was little the Australian government could do at that point in time though, as he was overseas in Spain. However, David had left his family, including his 2 daughters, back in Australia. And in 2018, there was a father's dance coming up that David was being told about, and he obviously wanted to attend. So despite the possibility of life imprisonment, he flew back to Australia and attended it. He was then arrested at the Sydney airport in September of 2018, assumedly trying to leave the country. They then charged him with theft of Commonwealth property, including other stuff to do with leaking classified info in 2019. All this came to head in October of 2022 when it was declared that the case would go to trial. However, David's legal team attempted to use whistleblower laws as a defense. For that to go through, however, it relied on the witness testimony of 2 expert witnesses. 2 expert witnesses that were completely disallowed from ever speaking as it was considered a national security risk. This is due to the classified nature of the documents that David McBride originally leaked. This left him with the impossible task of proving that he was just doing his job and exposing the illegal war crimes without evidence of any war crimes. This led to the aforementioned sentencing of 5 years, 8 months imprisonment, with 2 of those years and 3 months having no chance of parole, with this entire sentencing having no chance for him to appeal. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, it would be appreciated if you like. This format of video isn't going to be coming out as consistently as it was, mostly due to the fact that my phone is broken right now, and that's what I use to record, but also because I need to dedicate more time to the Terry Davis research for my big, hour-long or multiple-hour-long video that I plan on uploading to this channel within the year. Anyway, this video was a collection of my Instagram videos that didn't make it to YouTube, mostly just down to the fact that YouTube Shorts categorizes videos based on whether they're the correct resolution and 59 seconds or under. A lot of those videos I couldn't cut down to 59 seconds without cutting out the most crucial information, so I just decided to do a big video in which I combine them together as a collection of anti-government, I guess, videos. I'll probably do more compilation type things like this in the future. It just depends on how many videos I make that are in a similar vein, especially when it comes to the short form side of stuff. Other topics like the aforementioned Terry Davis will have their own dedicated video still.